I don't see it as Jewish. I see this as the heritage of the believer. Jesus was a Jew, pure and simple. He was born of Jewish parents. He lived a Jewish life. He wore the talit. He said the Jewish prayers. He prayed in the temple. He went to the festivals. He did everything that the Jews did. And their way of looking at things, they're the ones that wrote the Bible. It was all Jews. There's that possible chance that Luke wasn't a Jew. I don't buy that because he knows too many Jewish things not to be a Jew. Proselytes just wouldn't have been that well trained. But, the scholars can argue that till the cows come home. That's just my humble opinion. It's not a Jewish thing. None of this is a Jewish thing. This is about how your Messiah feels about you. And we've got to get this picture. We've got to see it from that angle. We've got to see it from the original customs and the original language and the original culture. And when we can see that, then we can really truly experience the fullness of His presence and the fullness of His life and His love in our life. There is a lot of Jewishness there, and I don't think we should be afraid of it because we don't have to become Jews.
That's right.
It's okay to be a Gentile. That's one of the main points of Fire on the Altar, is to show where the Gentiles became a part of this, how they became a part of it. And I go into some detail about what is expected from us. No, we don't have to wear the talit. We don't have to put a kippah on our head. We don't have to pray toward Jerusalem and all of that stuff. The disciples put it real plainly. There was just a few things that were necessary things. And Jesus put it real simply. He said that you love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and that you love your neighbor as yourself. And on all of that hung all of the law and the prophets. It's really simple. We don't have to do those things. There's nothing wrong if you do those things. I know a lot of Gentiles do that, and that's okay. I'm not one of them. But I think it's okay to be a Christian and to trace your heritage, because your heritage is Jewish. It's very Jewish. I became very, very angry with God many years ago. I grew up in church, born and raised Pentecostal holiness. And I became angry at God because I bought into all of that name it and claim it, blab it and grab it. That's what we like to call it now. We didn't call it that then. And I believed that God was going to make everything right. And, and regardless of the bad mistakes that I had made, the bad decisions I made, well, that didn't count because I was blabbing it and grabbing it. I was when it didn't work out for me, I got angry with God. And so 13 years later, when I came to my senses and pulled my head out of the trough, because, see, I wasn't raised like the prodigal son. I had my head in the trough. So that's the way I like to describe it, because that's the way I felt like my life had gone. And when I came to myself and realized I've got to go back to God, I went right back to the same thing I'd always known. I went right back to the Pentecostal holiness movement. And I don't mean for that to sound bad. I still go to a Pentecostal holiness church, and I love the church. The pastor couldn't be more full of love than this guy. I mean, I don't mean to be bashing them, but that was just my experience in the church I grew up in. But I went back to a church that was not like that. They were full of love. They were very open, very accepting. And I mean, this is a Pentecostal holiness church with women with short, bleached blonde hair, and nobody seemed to care. And I thought, well, this is really great. They've really changed in the last 13 years. And it wasn't so much that. It was just the church I'd grown up in. But I went back to my old ways. I went back to my old expectations and expecting myself to be perfect. And, 20 years of cussing like a sailor was somehow supposed to stop the next day just because I gave my life to God, and it didn't. And so I would get angry at myself, and the next thing you know, I'm cussing, and then I'm ashamed, and I'm mad, and I'm angry, and just this vicious cycle I could not get out of. I got right to the point of trying to figure out how to commit suicide and leave my wife enough money to make it. And I couldn't figure it out. Fortunately, I didn't know our policy would cover suicide. Thank God I didn't know that. But I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out how to make myself die and it looked like an accident, So, so I was just really in despair because I didn't know what to do. I couldn't live with God and I couldn't live without God. Mm-hmm. And then I was on the internet one evening and I ran across Dr. Wheeler's website. And he had this story in there about one day in the life of Jesus. And it was a long-winded story about one day. Most intricate, detailed thing I'd ever read in my life. I couldn't believe somebody had picked all this detail out of that one day. But I didn't understand a word of it. I read that thing over and over and over again. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And a few months later, when I got to the point where I just didn't care what happened, I'd had enough, just as a last-ditch effort, I wrote him an email. And he answered my email, much to my surprise, and got me into his yeshiva and taught me Hebrew, and I've never looked back since. I've never left it. I've never wanted to go back to that, you know, because I finally discovered a God who loved me for what I was and was okay with me where I was, would walk with me through it and get me to the other side. And so here it is many years later, but there was just no going back. Once you start seeing the pictures behind those Hebrew words and you start putting that together and you start living it, because I used to read the Bible and I thought it was alive. I thought it, you know, because I could just picture it in my mind. But now I can't, it's not just that you picture it, I can hear it, I can smell it, I can taste it. It's so much more alive than it ever could be just reading it in English. And there's just no going back when you've done that.